And we are here today to screen our original documentary called Atari Game Over. And it's brought to you by Xbox, Lightbox, and Fuel Entertainment. And you will be able to see it and experience it in an interactive form on the Xbox One and Xbox 360 in mid-November. So if you want to see it again or tell your friends. And then afterwards, we are passing out Atari t-shirts. So right next door, after the Q&A, we'll be passing out t-shirts. And I would like to introduce Howard Scott Warshaw, the star of the
Hey, bring it on now. I've been hearing that for 30 years. It's not going to bother me now. So I'm Howard, of course. I actually did the E.T. video game all those years ago. Did not know I would wind up standing here today talking to you about this game. As many of you know, this game has received some criticism. But the truth is that I became a therapist. Recently, I'm a licensed therapist in the state of California, and I can work over the internet if you're a California resident, keep that in mind. But the truth is, you know, part of the reason I became a therapist might be to deal with some of the trauma and depression I created with this game. So I just wanted to set up what we're going to see. What we're going to see is, this is a retro gaming conference, right? This is not a modern gaming conference. And what's a retro movie experience, right? In the old days, you'd have a short before the film, right? So we're going completely retro here. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a little short, a little trailer for the Once Upon Atari documentary series. How many of you have heard of Once Upon Atari? Yeah! Okay, so that's my documentary series. I have some here. These will also be available after the screening, after the Q&A, next to the t-shirts. It's all good. I will be available. I brought plenty of autographs with me just in case. And so the movie is a very interesting experience. I mean, because what this is an exercise in contrast, right? You're going to see a trailer from a documentary that I did, about 12 to 14 years ago. And you're going to see a really full-on production from a modern Hollywood studio. It's very cool. And that's like contrast. Contrast, like, I have one game, Yar's Revenge, that's in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I have another game, E.T., that is the subflooring of the New Mexico desert. So there's contrast, and I like contrast. I think contrast illuminates. And I think what they've done, I got a call a long time ago. First, I started getting calls from some of you, actually, people out here saying, hey, Howard, they're doing something about E.T. Have you heard? Have you heard? Have you heard? And everyone knows, well, have they talked to you? Have they talked? I said, no, nobody has talked to me. I'm sure they'll get to it. And then it was, and then we talked, and then we talked some more, and I talked to Zach, the director, and that was really exciting. And next thing you know, this thing is happening, crews are showing up, and it was just a very, very exciting process. And, I'm not someone who apologizes for the stuff I did. E.T. was a game that I will talk to you more about after the movie, but I never dreamed it would wind up with something like this. I've seen like a rough cut, some of it. I have not seen much of this. So I'm really looking forward to experiencing this with you. And afterwards, I will be up here and we will talk more. So without further ado, thank you very much for being here. I hope you enjoy it. So how'd you like the show?
Yeah, good. All right. So good, we're going to watch it. Yeah! Part 2. They put the cartridges back.
That's a weird experience to watch that for me, that's for sure. It's, very emotional thing. So, the admiration of your peers. Very vindicating. So that dig was a really interesting event. Working on the game was a very intense thing. But to see something, like I said, something that I did so long ago, you know, we're all here. And that was the idea. Thank you. So, I could start talking about the whole thing, but do you have any questions about any of the stuff first?
What was the time gap between playing the reprogrammed version and the previous time you played it? What was the last time you played before that?
Well, that's a good question. The last time I played E.T. before that's probably, let's say probably 10 or 12 years at least. And then I just played it a little bit because I think it was, and then probably when I was, so last time I played it before that was when I was making this because I played a bunch of games to capture footage for game footage that you'll see in the documentary, and it's, so that was in 96, 97, so yeah, I played E.T. I probably played about 10 minutes of E.T. in the last 20 years, and then played that. I will tell you the truth is when I did that thing where I played it through and won the game, I set it to the easiest game setting. So I could run through it and do it. Because, you know, I'm not a dummy. Good question.
During that 5-week period, what did your days look like? I imagine probably something like 18, 20 hours a day on programming.
It's interesting you asked that question in Las Vegas, right? Because, you know, in a casino, the whole idea is to make it clear that there's no differentiation between day and night. You can't see a clock, you can't see outside. That's big casino design, right? Well, I wasn't in a casino, but that's what life was like. There was no longer differentiations of day or night or what was happening. My whole circadian rhythm kind of got out of whack because when I was really tired and I couldn't keep working, I'd try and go to sleep. And then I'd either have a dream, you know, or I'd have an idea and I'd wake up, oh my God, and I would jump up and I would run to the development system. Like, I don't want to forget this. There's, like, a lot of game designers have this thing where you're sleeping and you have a dream. And you're playing the great game. You're playing like the perfect video game. And in the dream, it's like, there it is. And I know it, and I understand it, and I see it, and I've got the game concept in the dream. And I'm thinking, I am going to wake up, and I am going to make the greatest game ever. I have it. I have it. And you wake up, oh, shit, where is the game? Where, I know I had it, it was there. And it's that elusive thing. You know, that's the game developer's nightmare. And I didn't have that so much, but I would wake up, and instead of having a great idea for the game, I would solve a problem. I had a solution, and I thought, oh, I've got to go type that in now. So, and like, you know, towards the end when people ask me now, so how would you change the game? Yeah, I would definitely fix the pits and the wells and stuff. But I wouldn't eliminate them because that was a big part of what regenerated the game and made it go. You know, and the biggest problem that I had with E.T. was the ambition. Because just because I had 5 weeks, you know, every game that I did, I wanted to innovate. I really wanted to do something fresh and new. So people say, you only have 5 weeks to do a game. it doesn't occur to me to say, well, that's no reason not to innovate. You know, so I still wanted to do something. But the trick to doing a game in 5 weeks is to design a game you can do in 5 weeks. It's not to take a 6-month game and do that in 5 weeks. That'd be crazy. So I tried to come up with a game that was so simple, because it'd be easy to program, but had a randomization component to it so it would have some life. And I didn't have the time to do the tuning, because really the problem with E.T. was it was a game that never had a tuning phase. You know, and that's an important part of the game. And this didn't happen. But the funny thing is like the things that I've settled on to do, like they said, they had asked somebody to make these tweaks to the game and they did it. And the truth is, the basic changes they're talking about, I probably could have done those in several hours. It wouldn't have taken that long to make those changes. I could easily have done it in a day. And the truth is, the day I delivered the game, somebody would have said, take one more day and do it. I would have said, get the hell away from me. I was so sick of looking at that game. I just couldn't do it anymore. It was like, I just didn't want to see it. But the other thing is, if I would have gone ahead and made those tweaks, it might have just been a mediocre game instead of like a really horrible game. And then we wouldn't be here. There'd be nothing to talk about. So it might have ruined everything. And so one point about it is, you know, one of the things that I specialize in practice now is helping people deal with failure, difficulty. And because, you know, as the Silicon Valley therapist, Silicon Valley is full of failure and disappointment. And this is a place where people who would be enormously successful people anywhere else in the world are average or maybe a little below average. And this thing happens. So companies start all the time, games get made all the time. The games industry is a special case within the Silicon Valley syndrome because most games fail. I've heard people say that there are like 100 games a day published now with all the possibilities are to publish games, and one of those games will do okay. And okay just means make some money, and that could be very little money. So in the games business, as a producer, you deal with failure a lot. So, you know, but I'm not a big believer in failure, right? Because a failure is not an end, the way I see it. A failure is a launching point. It's a place you go. So I did the worst game of all time. But I've gone on to do many other things. You know, there's movie making, there's, you know, doing the therapy thing, lots of things. I mean, I've done a lot of different things because I'm always looking for a new challenge. And what I saw with E.T. was a challenge. It was a huge challenge. And it meant a lot to me to just do that. And the fact that I got through that always felt like a big success to me. Even for all the stuff that happened with E.T., all the feedback and all the stuff that went on, I knew doing what I did in the time that I did it, that was a success. And that's the way it felt for me. By the same token, players, I would never argue with a player about their experience with a game. Because it doesn't matter to a player how long a game took to make, what went into it. Who cares? You know, when I'm playing a game, all I want is a good experience. I don't care how it got there. So it's never bugged me. If people don't like the game, that's their take. And if they're genuinely, if that's their take, I'm cool with that. But for me, it always felt like kind of a win in a lot of ways, which is an odd thing to compare with the feedback. So it was interesting. I think there was a hand up in the back.
Yeah, do you still have a way of for creative outlets as far as in programming or just in general?
The question is, do I still have a creative outlet? I am a creative outlet. It's throughout my career. I mean, the brilliant thing about Atari, for me, what it really said was that here is an opportunity to do two things that I love, which is stretch my mechanical, technical capacity and my creative capacity and do both, because I always need to be doing both. And then after Atari, I went through a whole lot of careers and stuff, a lot of which were not as creatively demanding, so I was always working two jobs. So when I was working and doing compilers, or if I was doing other kinds of network programming or things that weren't as interesting as games, because for a while I didn't do games, I started doing other things. That's when I went back to school and got a certification in video production, started making movies. That's when I started writing books. There was always the creative job I was doing if my day job was not fulfilling that creative need. So it's a really good question. It's like, so today, I mean, I really meant it what I said. Atari set a bar for what life could be like that was really high in so many ways. And the most depressing part about leaving Atari was knowing, holy crap, nobody's going to provide this kind of environment again. So where do you find that? Where do you go from up? And I knew it would be a while before I could find something or figure out or create something, and it was a long time. Every job I had after Atari was, yeah, but it's not Atari. For about 25 years. But for me, becoming a therapist, becoming an actual psychotherapist, this is the first time I've gotten that back together, because psychotherapy is a very interesting application, if you look at it that way. A lot of people think, well, you're an engineer and then you become a therapist. How could you think of two more different kinds of job or work? And what I like to tell people is, well, it's not really that different. I'm still a systems engineer, it's just I work on human systems now instead of computer systems. So on that level, it's actually very similar. But a lot of people, a lot of technical people never bother to go into any kind of human-focused endeavor or things like that. And believe me, a lot of therapists do not come from the technical world. So a lot of people don't get that bridge. But it's always been kind of interesting to me and very clear. But what it does do, what's interesting about therapy is that what therapy is about is connecting with someone, actually making contact with someone. So what that takes is me reaching into my background and what I have and seeing if I can find a place where I can match up with someone so I can understand their experience, really understand it and get it, and then let them know I'm there with them. So having had the incredible diversity of experience that I've had enables me to work with a much larger group of people and really find contact and connection with a lot of different people. So it's very gratifying. And there are very few more creative endeavors than trying to understand, comprehend, and then define a path, a positive path for someone's, trillion neuron complicated situation that's going on. That's worse than, GPUs and stuff like that. So it's a very creative endeavor, and it involves the same kind of an analytical approach, but it has an extra kick of being all the emotion and excitement. And I think I mentioned in the other presentation, like, the cool thing as a programmer of doing games is that you can't just make the program work, it has to be fun too. And very few programmers have that in their, be fun in their spec, right? That's a tough thing to add to a spec. So, dealing with a person is okay and that's all good, but helping them get happier, be more functional, that's a tough thing to put in a spec. And I like that challenge. So I'm still chasing the tough thing to do. And this is something that really, it's also the first thing that really pulls together everything I've ever done. And I've done a lot of different things, but I've never found one thing that really required all the other stuff. So it's very gratifying for me. And so today I'm now doing work that's actually more satisfying to me than what I did at Atari. So another way I put it sometimes is I used to spend a lot of time entertaining all kinds of people. And now I work on making their lives better. And that's pretty cool too.
So what was the first thought going through your head when you heard that, oh, they're going to go to New Mexico, they're actually going to dig up the Atari lamp? I mean, what was going through your head when you first heard about that?
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, honestly, the first thing that went through my head is like, what a waste of time. I can't believe they're going to spend all that money going and doing all that stuff. But, boondoggle. So, so that was cool. And my lovely wife, Sherry, who is here with us today. So we thought, hey, we'd like to go to New Mexico. So that's fun. So, and that's the way it was. But this will be fun. Who knows what's going to happen? You know, for many years, I've always said it makes no sense. This is the most ridiculous idea in the world that a company that's failing financially is going to spend the money to take all this garbage that they think is worthless, so they want to bury it, and bury it way out in the desert somewhere instead of just throwing it in the garbage. But when you start expecting things to make sense, you're losing touch with Atari. And that's what made Atari such an amazing place to be. Because it didn't make sense, but it was awesome.
So you didn't know for sure if that was actually true?
I believed it wasn't true. I mean, I really believed it was not true. So I didn't know. And when the stuff came out, I was really surprised. But I will tell you, I have been saying, you know, for 30 years, there's nothing in there, it's ridiculous, there's no burial site. I've never been so happy to be wrong in my life. Because, you know, being part of this movie was really a lot of fun. It was really exciting, it was very cool. You know, I can always use some positive feedback, which was like what I was hoping it was going to be. And I'll tell you, you know, this is much less of an interesting movie if it turns out there's nothing there. I think that director would have been very depressed if we had found nothing. You know, you don't want a guy who has all your footage, can do anything he wants with it, thinking the only thing I can do to salvage this is to make this a big joke. Because if you've ever seen any of his other things, what he really specializes in is mockumentaries. And although I love being in this film, the way this came out, this is like really meaningful to me. I would not want to be the primary subject of a mockumentary. You know? So this worked out well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because, yeah, I mean, it was always, you know, people were always 90% sure that this actually happened, but it was like, you know, nobody, I mean, that photo from the newspaper was the first, photo from the newspaper at the time was, that was the first time I ever even knew that there was any sort of documentation sort of proving it.
Right, and if you look at that photo, you really can't see any Atari stuff in it, so even so, it's just a picture of some stuff getting dumped. Not against that. But it was just, I just never bought it. I never bought into it.
Do you still catch up with some of the other people from Atari back in that day? Back in that time when you were there?
I do. I do. Some of them are in this room right now. I have definitely spent some time with them and I really enjoy it. There were some lifelong friendships that got lost. Because, you know, it's the foxhole mentality and stuff. I mean, we shared some very, very intense times together. But it wasn't like being scared heads were going to get blown on. So that's the upside. Although it felt like that, there were times where it was really scary at Atari, where it'd be like, you know, like rumors or something's going to go on, or they're going to get rid of something, something's going to happen. Atari was an intense place to be. But it was also, we were all people who really were doing stuff we absolutely loved to do. It was so meaningful to be doing this. And we were launching an industry, which is an exciting thing to do, to be a pioneer in a brand new medium, which is that's the way I always looked at it. It's like, that was just amazing. So to have this opportunity to do this amazing thing and then hang out with people who were like some of the coolest people you could ever imagine, and every one of them had their own different interests. So like I've gone on to do, you know, some movie maker, and I don't like the real estate broker too much, all kinds of programming, photographer, writer. I do a lot of these different things. And they all had their own specialties. You know, there were craftsmen, there were people who would do, I can't even think of, there's just so many different activities and hobbies that people had. They were really substantial, interesting people to be around. And you just knew, anytime something came up, you had an idea. This was a crew of people you could go share that with, and you knew something really interesting was going to come out of it. And I'm not always in that kind of environment. So it was really special for me to be there. It was an amazing crew of people. I worked with a number of talented people throughout my life, you know, some really solid, interesting, smart, clever people. But I don't think I've ever been in as uniformly a remarkable environment as when I first got to Atari and the people who were there. There's one right there. Bob Palare.
What's the worst game ever made in your opinion?
That's a horrible thing to say to somebody, especially somebody who's, but, you know, I should say E.T. because I love hanging on to that title. You know, I mean, E.T. just being not a great game is, you know, I'm not as much in favor of that. I really like E.T. being the worst game because then sometimes yours is the best game, and I have the greatest range of any designer in history. Right? So I like that. But to be real and honest with you and answer the question, I was once asked to review a number of games on a number of different platforms, and one game I played was Charlie's Angels. On the GameCube or something. That was probably the worst game I've ever seen. I mean, the game was not complete, and I don't think it had an objective. Outside of that, it was like, I mean, I did E.T. and I thought this thing was horrible. Forgot it. Good question. You have no choice.
It's kind of common knowledge that the last 10% of any game takes about half the development time. So using that formula, in your case, you did 90% of your development in about 17 days.
Well, I don't know if I would apply the formula that way, because the reason it's like you have that 90% occurring up front is because the rest of that time is tuning and elaboration and really working the game out, right? So what I didn't do was fit a normal game development in a shorter amount of time. I kind of truncated the tuning part. See what I'm saying? So I did probably 95 to 98% and then ignored anybody who had anything to complain about it because I was too busy trying to finish it. And so it was tough. But it's true, I mean, it lacked those things. It's like, I think it was an interesting design, and I was happy with what I did, but I think I still, you know, even with 5 whole weeks to do the game, I still bit off more than I could chew. Go figure. But it was, and that's the thing, is it lacked enough tuning and play and feedback to go. I mean, it wouldn't take a genius to figure out, you know, you ought to do something about those bits. But it was just a question of getting to the finish line and getting done. It was tough. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Would you do it? I mean, do you remember the day that I said anybody else wanted to do it? Because we had a department meeting. We had a department meeting one day, and everybody, because people were saying like, oh yeah, Howard gets to go to E.T. Howard just did Raiders, and you know that. So how come Howard gets to do these Spielberg movies? And so, and this is like July 29th, so I'm already 2 whole days into the project. And I said, I actually set up an department meeting. I said, okay, anybody who would like to do E.T., it's yours. I said, it's due by September 1st. Who wants it? And nobody took it. Nobody took it. I said, okay, well, I'll do it. And, you know, they were smarter than I was. Yeah.
How long did Yard's Revenge and Raiders take by comparison?
Good questions. Yard's Revenge took me about 6 months to get to the basic game. And then it went on for like another 6 months where it went through an incredible amount of testing. Because there was someone at Atari, who some people know, who really for some reason had it in for Yars. They didn't want Yars to go, so they kept ordering more tests and more tests and more tests. It was getting ridiculous. In the meantime, I was like kind of half ready to start another game, but didn't quite get there. And it all came down to a play test. And that was one of the more traumatic moments, but it turned out to be a wonderful moment, was because, you know, we do focus tests, and most of you know focus tests, you have some people come over and you feed them pizza and you let them play a game and you ask them what they think. It's a very qualitative kind of thing. A play test is something where you get like 100 people and you give them the game you're testing and you give them another game and they play both games and they rate the games. And so they said, we're going to do a play test, this is going to be the final thing about Yars, and here we go. And I'm like, okay, I really want to see this. What is, and the first thing I want to know is, what's the game we're testing against? Because that's the big question. And it turns out the game we're testing against is Missile Command. Okay, which is the #1 game. I thought, shit, I can't believe it. And I was so depressed. I thought, oh, they're doing everything they can to sink this game. just release it. That was like my mantra, just release the damn game, release it if everybody likes it. And no, we had to do this play test. And I went to Seattle, which is where we had the play test, and I sat there in the booth and started watching and tabulating the sheets as they came back. And the first sheet I saw really tanked my game, and I thought, oh man, here we go. But by the time it was all tallied, yours beat Missile Command. And it's like, that was like, it was an astounding, stunning moment. It set a record for play testing, and not only that, but there's basically 4 demographics. There's adult men, adult women, young men, and young women. And it scored high in all 4 categories, but the category it scored the highest in was adult women. And like you heard Carla in that clip. Oh, by the way, that clip from Once Upon Atari, did you all catch the Easter egg? There's an HSW Easter egg in that trailer clip. I wondered if anybody caught it. So, I'm just a sucker for Easter eggs. So I said to them, okay, so here's a game that not only has set the new record in playtest, but you say you want games for adult women, we're trying to get adult women involved. Here's a game that scored high with adult women. Release the damn game already. And so they finally did. And then if you look at the commercials for Yours Revenge, most of them are aimed at like 10-year-old boys. And they totally miss it. And I asked people in marketing, I said, well, this game, you want games for women, this game tested with women, why don't you market there? And what they said was, adult women don't like space shooters. No, they do. They like this. And that's the kind of mentality that you're up against sometimes, and that's frustrating. There were some really sharp, smart people in marketing, but they would say some really weird stuff at times. And that was one of the things that was very crazy making at Atari, to go through this, like Bob's classic examples, they come in, you do this amazing job getting this whole game together, getting things working and stuff, and they go, well, can't you make the ball round? Well, no. We can't. You don't know what it's like just to get the ball to move. And it was, so that was crazy. I think I lost track of the question there. Because, we do focus tests, and most of you know focus tests, you have some people come over and you feed them pizza and you let them play a game and you ask them what they think, and it's a very qualitative kind of thing. A play test is something where you get like 100 people and you give them the game you're testing and you give them another game and they play both games and they rate the games. And so they said, we're going to do a play test, this is going to be the final thing about yours, and here we go. And I'm like, okay, I really want to see this. And the first thing I want to know is, what's the game we're testing against? Because that's the big question. And it turns out the game we're testing against is Missile Command. Okay, which is the #1 game. I was like, shit! I can't believe it. And I was so depressed. I thought, oh, they're doing everything they can to sink this game. Just release it. That was like my mantra, just release the damn game, release it if everybody likes it. And no, we had to do this play test. And I went to Seattle, which is where we had the play test, and I sat there in the booth and started watching and tabulating the sheets as they came back. And the first sheet I saw really tanked my game, and I thought, oh man, here we go. But by the time it was all tallied, yours beat Missile Command. And it's like, that was like, it was an astounding, stunning moment. It set a record for play testing, and not only that, but there's basically 4 demographics. There's adult men, adult women, young men, and young women. And it scored high in all 4 categories, but the category it scored the highest in was adult women. And like you heard Carla in that clip. Oh, by the way, that clip from Once Upon Atari, did you all catch the Easter egg? There's an HSW Easter egg in that trailer clip. I wonder if anybody caught it. So, I'm just a sucker for Easter eggs. So I said to them, okay, so here's a game that not only has set the new record in playtest, but you say you want games for adult women, we're trying to get adult women involved. Here's a game that scored high with adult women. Release the damn game already. And so they finally did. And then if you look at the commercials for Yar's Revenge, most of them are aimed at like 10-year-old boys. And they totally missed it. And I asked people in marketing, I said, well, this game, you want games for women, this game tested with women, why don't you market there? And what they said was, they said, you know, adult women don't like space shooters. I said, no, they do, they like this game. It's like, and that's the kind of mentality that you're up against sometimes, and that's frustrating. There were some really sharp, smart people in marketing, but they would say some really weird stuff at times. And that was one of the things that was very crazy making at Atari, to go through this, like Bob's classic example is, you know, they come in, you do this amazing job getting this whole game together, getting things working and stuff, and they go, well, can't you make the ball round? Well, no, we can't. You don't know what it's like just to get the ball to move. And it was, so that was crazy. I think I lost track of the question. Ha!
How long did Raiders take?
Yeah, thank you. So that was Yards. Raiders took about 10 months. Raiders was the game that took the longest. Raiders was a very complicated operation that I tried, because I wanted to make, you know, Warren Robinette did Adventure. And Adventure was an amazing genre-defining launching game. So I thought, you know, this is the way I think. If I'm going to do an adventure, I can't just do an adventure. I need to do something that's really going to be a step up. I want to do something that's going to make an impact. So I want to do the biggest adventure people could think of, with a lot of really different screens, different action gameplay on each one, with new kinds of visual effects. And I've got the tsetse flies and stuff for Raiders. And the tsetse flies use the same graphic component that's the square ball. You know, so you can always use stuff and do things with it, but so that took about 10 or 11 months. That was the longest game it took me to do. I started that before Yars was even released. The Yars stuff was still going on. I'd already started working on Raiders. And towards the end of Raiders, you could smell E.T. coming. You knew that was going on. And I actually said to one of the VPs, I said, I know you're going to want me to do E.T. after this. And I just want you to know, it's either really going to suck, or it's going to cost you a lot of money. And it was just very interesting process. But yeah, so it was like, so if you look at the three main games, Yars basically took about 6 months to do. Raiders took about 10 or 11 months, and then E.T. took 5 weeks.
This is just a question about the programming part. How hard is the program, the 6502, the semi-language program for the Atari 2600?
How hard is it?
Yeah.
Well, the hard part isn't programming the 6502. 6502 is not that hard to program, I don't think. The hard part is working with the hardware that talks to the TV, right? Because writing the code to run the processor, just do whatever, that's not too bad. But it's really, the trick with this was working with the hardware registers to tell the machine what to do. Because, you know, nowadays, you know, how many of you are familiar with the term bitmap? And I don't know if you know what that means, but it's like there's a whole area of the screen, and you just put pixel for pixel what the screen looks like, and you lay that all out. And when you're done laying that out, you tell the computer, okay, the screen's ready, and then it goes and displays the screen until you give it a next one. You go back and forth and keep making new screens, and that's it. Well, not so on the 2600. The 2600, you were actually programming stuff with the electron gun as it's sweeping across the screen. So you're actually updating things in real time. So things had to be accurate to the microsecond. And if it's off a little bit, you'll see a glitch. You'll see something wrong in your screen. It won't look right. And so that was the toughest part. The toughest part was figuring out ways to steal time and memory back and still achieve the same effect. That was really the hard part. You know what I mean? So just programming the processor wasn't too bad. Working within that hardware environment, that was really tough. But that's what made it fun. For me. Yes?
With the short time frame that E.T. had to do, how did you find the time to put an Easter egg in there? Did you find that was easy for you to put that in there and build it into the game, or was that kind of something that...
Well, I can answer that in one word.
Oh, yeah?
Priorities. You know, it's Easter eggs, that's my identity. in games, right? So one of the things I designed early on was, I had already established this thing, my signatures in YARS, the signature was HSWWSH. So that's not just putting my initials in the game, but that's also the key, because it's my initials and my initials backwards. That's what tells you that YAR is Ray backwards, and to look and reverse the order of letters and words in the game, because that'll answer some things for you about the game. So that's what I did with YARS. So in Raiders, I thought, okay, so in Raiders I put in not just an HSW, but there's an HSW2 in Raiders, because it's my second game. And then I also have a YAR that'll fly out of inside one of the mesas in there also. So I decided, I already had this rule that basically what I'm going to do, each game I do, I'm going to have an HSW with the number of the game it is in my sequence of games, and I'm going to have the main character from every previous game in it. So with ET, I kind of went nuts. Well, so many ways. Because, there's an HSW3, and there's the YAR, and there's Indiana Jones. There's also, if you look at it carefully, each of the phone pieces, when you find them in the bottom of the well, one of them's an H, one of them's an S, and one of them's a W. They're just deformed or laid on the side. So I managed to put it in there too. And they're all based around healing the flower, which I just think healing is a lovely thing. And so along the way, the thing is, as fast as you think and as fast as you work on this stuff, it doesn't take that long to come up with some of these things. It doesn't take me that long to come up with. The key thing about a signature is it needs to take up very little memory. So that's my restriction with it. I won't give it a lot of bytes. I need to do it as simply and efficiently. So as long as I had to have a phone piece graphic anyway, might as well use that as an opportunity to make it like one of my initials. So I just find lots of ways to sign the work.
On the subject of Easter eggs, I found myself, when I played Yards Redemption, to get really good at hitting the swirl in the middle of the screen, which, is pretty much...
That's the big point value. That's the goal.
And I found myself mistakenly keying that Easter egg off. And I never could figure out, why is this thing displaying, these letters on the screen? And I got really good at doing that, and I never could figure out why, what was triggering that. And I was curious to know, did Atari ever receive any complaints based off of people getting really good at that, or?
Some.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a poor choice on my part to make that end the game, but the way I had to squeeze it in and stuff, it sort of took it out of the game and left you stuck. So if you hit it, it actually ended the game for you. There's no real good reason for that other than I was out of bytes in the memory, and so that's the way it went. I should have been a little smarter and made it so it didn't stop it that way, but that's the way that went. And yeah, some people find that very annoying because you could be playing a great game and they, what the hell? This is not what I signed up for. So that sucks.
Yeah.
So I'd like to say one thing also about that. Sorry. I think we can take one more question. I know we're kind of running out of time.
Yeah, just going back to the landfill thing. So one thing that's always kind of confused me about that story is this didn't occur 100 years ago. This is semi-recent. The people who made that decision at Atari presumably might even be alive today. How did that knowledge just disappear?
Well, it didn't really disappear. I think what happens is, some voices get promoted and some voices get muffled. And the people who were talking about what this was didn't really, for some reason, didn't carry into the collective, consciousness. And you also have people love a story. This story didn't start circulating for at least a decade after E.T.'s done, right? It's like the early 90s where you start hearing about the landfill and things, even though it was known and it was done. So nobody talked about it for a while, and then when it was time to look at it, there was a story about it. There was like one column inch in the New York Times that said, oh, Atari buried some stuff, but that was it. And, but people love a legend, and the stuff that absolutely confirms or denies the legend doesn't help the legend, right? So, just like a lot of the people who say, E.T.'s the worst game of all time, have never played the game. That's really true. It's just, it becomes a lightning rod for haters. So, okay, that's what people like. But that's a bandwagon effect. People who are looking to just jump in with something, they're not looking to confirm or deny it. They just want to be a part of it, because that's where the meaning is for them. At least that's my interpretation of it. So, why did it happen? Those people were there saying, this guy Joe Lewandowski, the guy who really manages the dump and was instrumental in finding where this stuff was, he's been there for 30 years saying, yeah, that stuff's there. I don't know what the big mystery is. But people prefer a mystery sometimes. So I want to remind you that in the next room over, I believe there's the t-shirts for you, and if any of you are interested, I have copies of my documentary. That'll be available next door.
Howard, t-shirts are free.
Excuse me?
T-shirts are free.
The t-shirts are free. Did I not say free?
I don't know.
Let me clarify this. How much do the t-shirts cost?
Free!
Yeah, nothing. But my documentary will cost you at least 2 hours of your life and $20, but it's $30 online, and it's now downloadable. We established the downloading content, as you saw on the thing, probably with the GOG.com. So thank you all very much for being here. We really appreciate it.